you accept being part of the recording. Furthermore, we ask all participants to mute their microphones. However, all participants are welcome and encouraged to ask questions, either in the dedicated question and answer sessions or in the chat. Please wait until the end of each presentation and the chair will invite any questions you might have. As it concerns the expert group on national quality assurance frameworks, it includes 22 countries and 9 international and regional organizations. It is co-chaired by the United Kingdom and the Philippines. Today, we are very excited to present 2 additional tools for quality assurance developed by the expert group. The tools have been developed to further support the implementation of quality assurance and the implementation of the United Nations Manual on National Quality Assurance Frameworks that was published and adopted by the Statistical Commission in 2019. The tools have been developed over the last 2 years by 2 subgroups of the expert group. The first tool is a module to assist statistical agencies to systematically evaluate and address challenges in using administrative and other data sources by identifying possible areas for improvement and also identifying improvement actions. It will be introduced by Martin Villieu from Statistics Canada and Ms. Ocha Chipetekera from the Namibia Statistics Agency. Then subsequently, Matthias Reister, that's myself, will introduce also subsequently to that presentation, we will also have a brief demonstration that actually I will be conducting. The second tool is a maturity model on quality culture in official statistics. The development of this model stems from the realization that shared values and behaviors are very important for producing and disseminating official statistics. It will be introduced by Juliet Solano from the Colombian National Statistical Office, DANE, who led the subgroup on the maturity model. We will also briefly demonstrate the assessment checklist accompanying this maturity model. I would like to thank all countries and experts who provided inputs to the development of these two new tools by participating in a global consultation that was conducted last year, and also by participating in a testing exercise of those 2 new tools. With this now, I would like to introduce our first 2 speakers, Martin Villieu of Statistics Canada and Ms. Ocha Chipetekara of the Namibia Statistics Agency. Ms. Ocha Chipetekara is Data Quality Manager at the Namibia Statistics Agency, and she has over 10 years of experience in applied statistics, mainly in labor, poverty, and welfare statistics, as well as in data quality management. Ocha has been leading, together with Martin Villieu, the subgroup on administrative and other data sources. I would like now to give the floor to our first 2 speakers, Martin Villieu of Statistics Canada and Ms. Ocha Chipetekera of the Namibia Statistics Agency. The floor is yours, and you should have been made presenters to be able to bring up your presentation from your side. Martin, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Matthias. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It is my pleasure to be here this morning, in my case, to introduce the module on the use of administrative and other data sources. So let me share my presentation. Okay, can everyone see the slide?
Martin, at this moment we see a black screen. At least this is what I see.
Okay, let me see. And now can you see? I changed the slide, maybe it's better.
It's still the same.
Okay,
But let
I'll
me.
stop sharing and retry. Just apologies for that. What about now?
No.
No?
I'm checking with my colleague Harumi. Are you seeing it? I still see a black screen. So Martin,
Yes.
I can also share from your side, from my side, and you just tell me when to move the slide.
Okay, let's
If
do
the-
this.
Yes. Let's hope I'm more lucky.
Okay, I can see it. Thank you, Matthias. All right, so maybe you can move to the next slide already. Okay, so thank you. As Matthias introduced briefly, at the last report of the UN expert group on national quality assurance framework, the last report presentation that was at the Statistical Commission in 2023. The Statistical Commission recognized the need to support countries in the implementation of national quality assurance framework, and that the expert group should continue to provide guidance and promote the use of a national quality assurance framework. As part of the additional guidance that the expert group wished to provide, was something about the use of administrative and other data sources. So basically anything that is not a survey or census collected by statistical agencies. And to work on that, the expert group established a subgroup on administrative and other data sources, of which I had the honor to co-chair with my colleague from Namibia, Ocha. So the objective of this group was to provide some practical and concise guidance along with some best practices from statistical agencies in assuring quality of official statistics when administrative or other data sources or even multiple data sources used in combination are used to produce official statistics. So the subgroup developed a module that complements, and that's important to highlight this word, complements. It does not replace a national quality assurance framework. So it complements the existing generic national quality assurance frameworks to provide more specific and detailed guidance when using these types of sources. In the interest of time, I won't name all members of the subgroup, but I want to acknowledge their contributions, as well as Hans Viggo Sebo, who was working as a consultant on this, and the UN Stat Division Secretariat. Next slide, please. So how this module was developed. So we started by a review of existing practices in the different countries and international agencies with regards to the use of administrative and other data sources. Then looking at all these practices, critical quality principles, requirements, practices, and indicators were identified. And then as a third step, these principles, requirements, practices were mapped to identified practices to the UN and CAF principles and requirements. And at the end, the synthesis was made to identify common elements, identify critical requirements, and make the distinction of the requirements and best practices that are specific to the use of admin and other data sources. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first of all, when we talk about administrative and other data sources, how do we define them in the module? So first, so in the module, we discuss three types of sources. So first, the statistical data sources. So these are the more quote unquote traditional data sources that are used by statistical agencies. So basically, the probabilistic surveys, censuses, registers built by the statistical agencies. And the benefits of these sources is that they are created in response to a need of statistical data. And the statistical organizations control the production from beginning to end of these data sources. The second is administrative data sources. So these are created primarily by government agencies other than statistical agencies for their own administrative purposes. So they're not created for a statistical purpose to start with. That said, these sources offer many advantages such as cost effectiveness, reduction of response burden, improved timeliness, relevance, accuracy, reliability due to their ability to obtain high disaggregated data and more often than not micro level data. And third, there's the other data sources that include all data sets that are not created for administrative purposes by government or from statistical agencies. So they are created rather for commercial or other private purposes. So in these sources, we may have like satellite imagery, telecommunication data, scanner data from retailers, etc. So the use of these other data sources, like the administrative data sources, can be cost effective and allow for more frequent and timely reporting of the phenomenon which we're trying to measure. And it may improve the relevance of the statistical agency. Next slide, please. So the module that we're introducing today, what is its purpose? So it's really to assist statistical agencies to systematically evaluate and address the challenges in the use of administrative and other data sources to be used for official statistics by identifying possible areas for improvement and improvement actions. So they can arise from at different stages of the statistical process. So it can be from the definition of concepts, identifying coverage, potential biases, non-standardized production processes, and so on. So the goal of this module is to be practical and concise. And again, it is to be used as a complement to National Quality Assurance Framework with more specific and detailed guidance when using these types of sources. Next slide, please. So this module is divided in two main parts. So the first one is the definition of a conceptual approach to assure quality when using administrative and other data sources. And the second part lists 10 critical requirements with some best practices to assure that these requirements are met. And there are 5 annexes that are added at the end of the document. So one that is a sub-module for input data validation with some quality indicators. We have a glossary of working definitions of the relevant terms. Annexes 3 and 4 are mapping with the UN and CAF requirements, as well as the mapping of the critical requirements to the conceptual approach and relevant and CAF requirements. And finally, Annex 5 links between the phases of the GSBPM and the 10 critical requirements. So at this point, I will hand it over to Ocha to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Martin. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear well.
Okay, thank you. As already alluded to by my co-chairperson and Matthias, my name is Osha, and then I'll be taking you through part 1 and 2 of the module. So part 1 is the conceptual approach to assure quality when using administrative and other data sources, which gives an overarching structure of what typically should be considered to assure quality when using administrative and other data sources. And it consists of important preconditions for actions and 2 overarching considerations as illustrated in figure 1 that I'll present in a minute. And then I'll also be taking you through part 2, which present the list of 10 critical requirements, which provides a concrete tool and practical guidance for using administrative and other data sources. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the conceptual approach and identifying relevant actions and aspects to be considered for when you are assuring quality of official statistics. So we have the 4 actions and overarching considerations on the site. So the 4 actions can be understood as activities or steps that typically need to take place when using administrative and other data sources, and can be taken individually or can follow each other or individually, doesn't matter, depending on the specific circumstances. And the 2 overarching consideration, it's a pity that I don't have a pointer, reflects aspects that must be considered during the 4 actions, and they concern confidentiality and data security, and also the quality of input data and metadata. And these 2 overarching considerations can take place when you are going through these 4 actions. So before we go with the actions, or before you start with the actions, we have important preconditions, which really you need to consider before the process of exploring or during, yes, thank you, Matthias, of exploring or during the use of administrative and other data sources. The first action is statistical need and selection of data sources, which based on user needs. So yeah, so based on the user needs, you have to identify and evaluate the data sources, whether whether in terms of quality, whether it's it talks to the user needs, the scope, the reliability, and so forth. And then also assessing that population is consistent with the output requirements, including concept and classification. So this needs to be aligned in order to talk to the user needs, and then the selection of data source as well. So action 1 is closely related to specifying needs of the generic statistical business process model, which is already, Martin already alluded to, that is in Annexure 5, if I'm not mistaken. So if you want to see more of mapping, you can see Annexure 5. So action 2 is cooperation with data provider. There must be a cooperation agreement or memorandum of understanding which facilitate access and usage of data, and then also to provide the quality report, and in a sense that you have to see they have to stipulate what time are we going to give data, how many times, and then so forth. And then also the statistical agency have to capacitate the data providers to ensure the quality of the data. And then also the statistical institute or agency have to give guidance on the development of the administrative data set and statistical standard and classification, including if there is any updates and so forth. So because the statistical agency, usually they are custodians of statistical standards, they have to ensure that data providers understands and then they follow as well without really giving burden to the data providers. So while you're doing action 2, cooperation with data providers, it's also very important to ensure confidentiality and data security of this administrative data, and to ensure that the quality of the input and metadata that is taken care of. So action 2 is closely related to specify needs, design, and build of the generic statistical process model. Action 3, which is data acquisition and processing, talks to that the NSO needs appropriate procedures to ensure that there is methodological soundness and the use of technologies are adhered to and innovations. And this is really to ensure that there's that data linkages between different data sources. And then also imputing and editing of these data and statistical registers and archiving are adhered to, depending on the standards that are in place. And action 3, which is data acquisition and processing, also talks to build, collect, process, and analyze of the generic statistical business process. Also, while we are doing data acquisition and processing, it's very important to ensure that the confidentiality and data securities are in place. And then the whatever data that you are getting from the data providers are of good quality, and then also metadata to ensure that the user will be able to see how the data was collected and so forth. And the last action, which is dissemination, it's quite critical for the characteristic of administrative data in other data sources to be considered when you are disseminating these statistics at the end of the day, because you have to ensure that the confidentiality and data securities are in place, and then the quality of also of input data and metadata. And this is also can be talk to action of disseminate and evaluate of the generic statistical business process. And you can also evaluate the outputs using user satisfactions. And then also you have to talk to clarity and ensure that there's clarity of these outputs, which is the standardized metadata and user-oriented quality reports have to talk to. Before I move on to the next slide, the numbers that you see there in the brackets indicate the link to the relevant United Nations National Quality Assurance Framework requirements or principles. The relevant UN requirements are listed in Annex 3. So, for example, when you look at important preconditions, legal basis, it talks to 2.1 and 2.6 of the UN NCAF. And those mapping are also provided into our annexures. So I have to brief because of the time. So moving on to the next slide. This is part 2, which presents the list of 10 critical requirements that provide specific and detailed guidance for assuring quality when using administrative and other data sources to produce official statistics. The list is complementary to the use of NCAF and is not a substitute for it. My co-chairperson have also highlighted or emphasized this one, that this is really a complementary to the NCAF or UN NCAF. The checklist contains requirements not addressed or not sufficiently reflected in the NCAF. The 10 requirements are considered critical, as without them, the quality of official statistics when using administrative and other data sources may not be sufficiently assured. The 10 critical requirements are underpinned by a set of suggested or best practices that have been identified in a thorough review of large sets of country practices and guidance materials. These suggested practices are often more detailed than the elements to be assured under the UN NCAF requirement, as and as UN NCAF is generic, while the checklist is specific for its purpose. So that's why we have this complementary list, is really to just make sure that it talks to administrative data sources on, how to ensure the best of it, because the UN NCAF is generic. It's not specific to administrative and other data sources. Next slide, please. So in short, this is the list of 10 critical requirements. Number one is, okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Number one is the use of administrative and other data sources must be based on legal and actual access, ensure confidentiality and take user needs into consideration. So there should be legal access to the data. There should be actual access to the data, and also the data sources have to comply with existing laws and regulations. And then number two, the new data sources, data providers, as well as the use of multiple data sources, are proactively explored to produce or improve existing statistics or to develop new statistics. There should be, policy, guideline, practical procedures for exploring and testing the potential of new data sources for producing or improving existing statistics or the development, of new statistics. And the third one is there is a basic information about the data provider and general information about the data source. About the data source. So there should be information about, the data provider, the name, the address of the data provider, the information about the legal mandate of this data provider and so forth, just to ensure that there is a reliable in future to get this data moving forward and so forth. And the fourth one is the data provider and data sources are assessed for their risk. This is cost and benefits analysis that we have to do before we start making use of our administrative data sources and other data sources. There are cooperation agreement with the data providers, and there is ongoing cooperation as applicable. So this I've already alluded to. There should be MOU, memorandum of understanding with our data provider. This stipulates the timeliness of this data. How often are you going to get this data, and so forth? And if you don't get the data, how do you go on about it, and so forth? And the sixth one is the data provider assures the quality of its data. And the quality report or quality declaration is produced in cooperation with the statistical agency as applicable. And we also don't want this data provider to work in silos. We want the statistical agency together with data providers to come up or to develop best way on producing this data to ensure that the quality is good. And then we also want the data provider to give the quality reports on how they have assured the quality and so forth. And then the seventh one is the quality of the input data is systematically evaluated by the statistical agency. I think that one is clear. The eighth one, there is a comprehensive metadata about the input data. And number 9, the processing of input data as the statistical agencies follow standards, guidelines, and best practices. And this really talks to our actions, our earlier actions in where we said we don't want the data provider not to be aware of the standards that are in place or classification. So the processing of input data at the statistical agency have to follow these standards. Also, the data provider have to be aware of these standards so that they can also compile to this data. And then the special characteristics of administrative and other data sources are considered when disseminating statistical outputs. Next slide, please. So how do we use this module? Okay, use the list of 10 critical requirements as applicable in addition to your NCAF. Or if you don't have your NCAF, you can always consider the UN NCAF as well. So the disclaimer, the list provides more specific and detailed guidance when using administrative and other data sources than what is contained in a generic NCAF. Many of those critical requirements overlap with parts of the UN NCAF and other NCAF. Just a quick explanations. When you are referring to the UN NCAF, is the United Nations generic national quality assurance framework, and then the NCAF is at the national level where different countries have different NCAF. The suggested practices identified in this module are ambitious, may not be applicable in all circumstances, and may be difficult or not always possible to follow for statistical agency depending on the specific situation. However, when applicable, they allow for the identifications of areas of improvement in the spirit of the Plan, Do, Check, Act, Cycle for Continuous Improvement by Cycle for Continuous Improvement made popular by Edward Deming. So this is really to ensure that there is a continuity improvement of our statistical outputs. So this is also to note that the module and its assessment checklist can also be used in isolation without knowledge of a national quality assurance framework. This is quite important. The module and its assessment checklist can also be used in isolation and without knowledge of a national quality assurance framework. This, however, means that overarching aspects that are reflected in the national quality assurance framework are not given consideration, because there are certain aspects in the NCAF that were not highlighted here because we thought they were fully explained or explored in the UN in the NCAFs. So if you are only using the module without considering the NCAF, then you won't be able to make use of those aspects that were left out here. Next slide, please. The purpose of identifying areas of improvement when using administrative and other data sources for producing official statistics. This checklist assesses individual statistics mainly produced from a single administrative or other data sources or other data source. If multiple data sources are used, their individual impacts must be explained. This checklist corresponds one-to-one to the list of 10 critical requirements and suggested practices. The assessment checklist distinguishes suggested practices which are essential and additional or advanced to simplify the assessment and concentrate on main points. The designation can be adjusted by users. So at this point, I would like to invite Matthias to take us through the checklist and also to demonstrate the tool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin and Ocha, for the presentation. And yeah, we have a very nice document which explains all of that. But we also have an assessment checklist, which is an Excel file. It's in it's in Excel format, and I will briefly take you through that. Let me just make sure that you have a good visibility before I bring it up. One second. Let me share my screen now. So, Osha, Martin, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So, thank you. So just very brief, so that everybody has seen this assessment checklist. This assessment checklist mirrors one-to-one the list of 10 critical requirements. In the column A, you have the list of 10 critical requirements, and under each of those 10 critical requirements, you have suggested practices. For example, the first critical requirement, and now I may maybe make it even bigger here. Let me see where I can make it bigger. Yeah, the first critical requirement is the use of administrative and other data sources must be based on legal and actual access, ensure confidentiality, and take user needs into consideration. The first suggested practice here is there is legal access to the data. So this is the first suggested practice. And under each of those 10 critical requirements, we have suggested practices. And each of those suggested practices, and we have a total of 55. We have 10 critical requirements, and we have 55 suggested practices under those 10 critical requirements. Each of those suggested practices, you are requested to assess whether you are in full compliance, in partial compliance, or not in compliance with that suggested practice. If you are in compliance, then you get a score 1 for that suggested practices. If you are in partial compliance, your score is 0.5. And if you are not in compliance, then your score is 0. So what does it mean, full, partial, and no compliance? Full compliance means there's only very little room for improvement, or no room or very little room for improvement. Partial compliance means there is room for improvement, and no compliance means urgent action is needed. For example, there is legal access to data. You don't have legal access to the data, then you are in no compliance. So with this, I just explained to you the 10 critical requirements and suggested practices and the assessment that has to be conducted for each of those suggested practices. So that assessment is to be conducted for the use of each individual data source. So here on top, in the second line, you are requested to indicate the data source that you are using. And then in the first line, you are also requested to indicate the statistical output that is produced with that statistics. For example, just a very simple example, merchandise trade statistics. Now, we are all familiar with exports and imports. Usually, these are based on custom records. So here the data source, the administrative data source, are the custom records that are the custom authorities sort of lodging whenever a good is entering and leaving a country. This is your data source, or that could be your data source, and you're producing international trade statistics out of it. That is just one example. So here the scoring, just very briefly. So we have 55 suggested practices. We have essential practices and advanced. What's the difference? Essential is really sort of what you should assess at a minimum, right? And additional if you want to go a step further. So that's the difference here. However, each of those suggested practices, you're evaluating whether you're in full, partial, or not in compliance. If you're in full compliance, you score the point 1 point. If you are in partial compliance, you score 0.5. So, and all of this is added up, and then you will be able to gain overall score differentiated by essential and additional suggested practices. However, here on the left side, on the right side, sorry, on the right side, here we are also providing a score by critical requirement. And let me just score those first 5 suggested practices, and let's just assume we are in full compliance with all of them. Then we are scoring 100. If we are only in partial compliance, only scoring 0.5 for each of those suggested practices, then our overall score would be 50%. Right. So this is how this assessment checklist works and how the scoring works. What I did not mention yet, here in the column E, you also requested to describe your practices and possible improvement actions. So scoring is nice. Scoring is useful for comparison over time and comparison of the use of different data sources. So scoring has a role. However, the main point here of such an assessment checklist is really to identify areas of weakness. So where you're scoring very low in one of those 10 critical requirements. Here in this file, I also have an example where we have actually entered some example text, of course, provided by someone. Here I just, as an example, I scored everything as full compliance, and then you're everywhere on 100%. So this was just a very brief introduction of the assessment, assessment checklist. And with this, I would like to finish already. Now I'm checking with Harumi, are there any questions in the chats or any hands being raised?
Yes, Matthias. There are a couple of questions in the chat. And the first one is, how can we measure the level of accuracy of administrative sources, just like RSE in survey source? And this is from Statistics Indonesia.
If I may just come in, of course, also can maybe Martin and Ocha can add to that. But this question is addressed in Annex 1, where we are providing indicators for assessing the quality when starting to actually start using the data. So we have such indicators in Annex 1. Martin, you want to add to that?
No, actually, that's what I was about to say, that Annex 1 provides indicators to evaluate the data to be used as input. And as Hans Viggo replied in the chat, in terms of the quality of the final output, it's a different story. It all depends on the use, other sources available. But yeah, in terms of assessing the source to be used as input, Annex 1 will be of good help here.
I see also Ocha also has joined, but maybe also Hans Viggo responded to that. Maybe we sufficiently responded to that question. Are there any other questions from the audience? I think you're able to unmute yourself and or you can raise your hand and then unmute yourself. Are there any further questions?
Matthias, there was someone in the chat asking if the presentation will be shared later. I assume yes, but
yes, the presentation will be shared I think we have a list of all participants and we can share with all. We will also, of course, make it available on the website. I see one hand being raised, and I see Ian, you also made yourself visible. Please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting to see the presentation. I was wondering, with the various questions you got for the practices, are some practices weighted in any way, or is it always just all practices are equal in weight?
So maybe just also to respond here first. So all suggested practices have an equal weight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but let me just think. When we are aggregating, we are using averages. So meaning in some critical requirements, we have more suggested practices than in others, but it doesn't mean that the score is then, let me just think. I just have to think a second. No, I see. I think since more the overall score is based on the list of suggested practices, and there is not always an equal amount of suggested practices. So some critical requirements will have then a higher weight than others.
Mhm.
Yeah. But also all suggested practices are at the same time also evaluated individually. No.
Thank you.
Matthias, if I may, just to add on the previous question, depending on each country or agency's circumstances and on the, I guess, the context of the need of the administrative data sources, it's always possible to add your own weights if there are requirements that are more important than others or less applicable, for which you would give a smaller weight. It's always a possibility.
But there was also a question whether we have logged any of those cells. No, you can use this Excel file as you wish. Nothing has been logged there in this assessment checklist. So if you want to change the suggested practices from additional to essential, you're able to do so. But then you also have to adjust the formulas. But you're entirely able to do so.
There is also another question on does the module include indicators to measure the quality of location data, coordinates and addresses for administrative sources? And there is a hand as well.
Let's go to the hand first. Joseph, please, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon here. My name is Joseph from Statistics South Africa. I just want to maybe briefly, maybe you can just share with us. I was looking at the action to cooperation with data providers. Maybe your experience in terms of the guidance on statistical standards and classifications, and my thinking is that for admin records and data set that can be a challenge, but maybe you can share with us your experience on that regard. Thank you very much.
Yes. Martin, Ocha, did you fully understand the question and are you able to respond?
I think, well, let me reword the question to see if I got it right. So basically, your question is how does the statistical agency can ask or encourage data providers to use standards? Is that what?
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
Yes. So, well, it depends on each, I guess, country's legislation, but in most cases, I guess the best way to do it is a collaboration. So the statistical agency can encourage the data provider to use standards. It eases data sharing. That said, in many cases, for example, in my experience in Canada, we cannot force a data provider to use standards, but with continuous collaboration, I guess there are ways to either they adopt the standards or there are ways to use kind of a concordance to make sure that the data is used properly.
Okay.
Okay, just to share our experience as well in Namibia. So NSA is responsible to coordinate the whole national statistical systems, and then we are also responsible to produce or develop statistical standards that are applicable to all the users, data providers, and so forth. So, and these standards are gazetted in our government gazette. That means they are public consumptions. Everyone have to comply with that. So when we are developing this standard, we don't do it in isolation. we develop with our stakeholders and data providers as well. So in a case where a data provider was not part of this process, then we have to take them through. If there is any, suggestions or they don't agree with, then we take their feedback where they don't agree with, so that we, in the next maybe edition or revision, will be able to incorporate and also consult them to ensure that we all have, the same level of understanding in order for them to start making use of the standards. But usually classifications are more international, so it's just for us to localize it.
Thank you very much, Martin Ocha. So there's a last question, and maybe I respond to that. And I think then we have to conclude this part on admin other data sources. So does the module include indicators to measure the quality of location data? No, it doesn't contain any explicit indicator on measuring the quality of location data. It's part of the overall considerations addressing accuracy and things like that. In this context, I should also mention, when we tested the module, we had a lot of examples on the use of admin data sources. We had not so many examples on the use of other data sources, such as geospatial data sources. So if users are using this module also for assessing the use of administrative and other data sources, we would be very curious to learn from you, your experiences, and then in a future iteration of this module, adjust accordingly. Okay. With this, thank you very much, Martin and Ocha, for the introduction of this module. We have to conclude this part of the side event, and now I would like to move to the introduction of the maturity model and quality culture. And here I would like to invite Ms. Juliet Solano, who is the Technical Director of Regulation at the National Statistical Office, DANE, in Colombia. She promotes the implementation of standards and good practices in the national statistical system, as well as innovation and perspective in the production of statistical information to the work with the Advisory Council on the National Statistical System. She also leads the process of implementation of the quality assurance framework for the National Statistical System in Colombia. Juliet has been leading the subgroup on the maturity model, and I would like now to hand over the floor to her to introduce the maturity model. The floor is yours, Juliet.
Thank you, Matthias, and greetings to all the participants in this webinar. So I will present the maturity model on quality culture in official statistics. I hope you are seeing my presentation now. So as a background information, the Statistical Commission Decision 54 recognizes the need to support countries in the implementation of a national quality assurance framework. And for this, it's important the provision of additional guidance materials. That's the reason why the expert group on national quality assurance framework established a subgroup on quality culture with the objective of provide practical and concise guidance, suggest a maturity model, and provide best practices as applicable and feasible on how a quality culture in official statistics can support the implementation of the national quality assurance framework at the national statistical offices and also the national statistical system. We have as members delegates from the expert group and different countries that support the work on the issue of developing this quality this maturity model. So I want to say thank you and manifest our for their support and their suggestions and comments along the way of developing this maturity model. In terms of the structure of the model, we have an introduction and we also have a definition of quality culture that was built based on discussions and participation of different actors. We include key characteristics that supports the development of a quality culture, and also present 4 levels of maturity and their measurements. As part of the Annex 1, we present the checklist for the assessments of the quality culture, and as part of the Annex 2, we present additional measures for assessing this quality culture. In terms of the national statistical system, we present some measures to foster quality at this level as part of the Annex 3, and we close the document of the maturity model with the glossary of key terms. For a start, it's important to answer this question: why is quality culture important? We all have in mind this definition of quality as fitness for purposes, and we know that this requires that official statistics are produced in a proper manner to support decision making in different contexts of our societies. But we also need to recognize the important role of their environment in which statistical production occurs, and the role of this environment in to foster the implementation of good practices and a quality management based on the commitment of all the people that is involved in the production of statistical information at the statistical office, but also in the across the national statistical system. So if we don't acknowledge the role of the quality in this process, we are taking the risk of undermining the trust and confidence in official statistics and the national statistical system. So quality is important, but also the environment in which statistical production occurs, and we need to acknowledge how we can foster a commitment and the promotion of good practices in order to support this process of quality assurance. So in terms of the purpose of the maturity model and quality culture, we need to recognize the role of a maturity model, that is a framework that organizations use to assess and improve their processes and overall performance in a particular area. So these models helps and supports organizations to understand their current state in a specific area and to set goals for improvement. In the case of our maturity model on quality culture, we assess the quality culture in the national statistical agencies, which includes the national statistical offices, but the other producers of official statistics across the system. The maturity model provides a generic roadmap for the improvement of quality culture. Statistical agencies may focus and prioritize efforts on the most critical aspects based on their circumstances, and also provides a common language for communication within the national statistical system, hereby supporting and fostering collaboration among different organizations. In terms of the use of this maturity model, we want to highlight that this maturity model and his related measures should be viewed as a practical tool to assess the level of maturity rather than a set of definitive measures. Users and countries have the flexibility and the possibility on determining what measure they wish to consider depending on their specific circumstances. And the use of the maturity model in the framework of all the tools that has been developed to support the implementation of the NCAF is optional. As an additional background, it's important to highlight that this maturity model is enriched and was based on the research, the responses to initial surveys we execute among the expert group members. We also receive feedback from countries during workshops, the expert group meeting, the global consultation, and the iterative discussion process within the subgroup of quality culture. So thanks to all the support and comments we received through these different channels, we now have this maturity model, but we recognize that this is new. This is a new approach to aboard quality, and it's a first effort. And we were not able to find any 16 documented practices in the statistical community on this matter. So this maturity model complements the set of guidelines and instruments that had been already been developed to support the implementation of the NCAF. This is our definition of quality culture, and is quality culture for official statistics can be defined as the shared values, mindsets, behaviors, practices, and knowledge related to quality assurance within at a statistical agency or unit of the National Statistical System that shape and characterize the work environment and individual workplace. It is a shared commitment focused on user needs and delivering of statistics products and services that are fit for purposes while continuously striving for improvement, innovation, and adherence to best practices and methods, hereby ensuring trust in official statistics. A common understanding of key concepts related to quality assurance on official statistics is fundamental to developing and sustaining this culture. So in terms of the characteristics that identify that reflect and support the implementation of the quality culture, we have 6 key characteristics. The first one, awareness and innovation. The second, communication management and channels. The third one, data governance. The fourth one, quality assurance monitoring and error handling. The fifth, high level commitment. And the sixth, staff commitment. The maturity model also has 4 levels of maturity for each key characteristics, and for these levels we also propose measures and indicators. So we have these 4 levels going from basic to established, in which we define basic as the rudimentary quality assurance culture established with basic staff awareness and initial efforts towards a quality culture. The level intermediate is the transition to a structured approach with standardized procedures, clear quality policies, comprehensive training, and basic quality assurance tools implemented. In the level 3 advanced, we recognize a culture of continuous improvement actively promotes the best practices, quality management integrated into workflows, fostering and supportive environment. And in the final level, established, we recognize the full integration of quality culture into operations, evident commitment from staff and management, and comprehensive systems to monitor and improve quality, resulting in high user trust. We have also identified some challenges in the implementation of this maturity model associated with that the measurement of assessment of a quality culture requires the identification of measures that allow to determine the level of quality culture present within a statistical agency. However, the shared values and mindsets that constitute a quality culture may be difficult or impossible to observe directly, and probably we need for their measurement the use of additional instruments to validate certain practices and behaviors, for example, through the conduct of surveys, interviews, focus group discussions, self-assessment, or behavioral tests. So probably countries and users will identify that in order to advance in the implementation of the maturity model, will be also need to complement the actions with the implementation of this kind of similar instruments to validate the items in relation with the behaviors, practices, and mindsets. We also categorize their measures. We identify several measures to describe the levels and the key characteristics, but we decide to focus and determine some as essential and others are additional, aiming to simplify, to make more simple the process of assessment and to focus on key aspects while allowing for a more detailed evaluation. So we limited the number of essential measures to 2 in each maturity level within every key characteristics. So the maximum number of essential measures that we have for one key characteristics are 8. And we classify the measures as additionals in order to recognize that there are more ambitious and additional practice. However, countries and users have the flexibility to determine which measures are essential and additional depending on their circumstances. And then we have this Annex 1 that is core to our maturity model, that because presents the assessment checklist, including the detailed calculation methodology to determine the maturity level of a statistical agency. So here we have the compliance for each measures is assessed using the following scale: full compliance with the score 1, partial compliance with the score 0.5 and not compliance with the score 0. Depending on the assessment, countries could identify that they have full compliance, they have a practice that corresponds to the purpose of the quality culture, or probably they need to establish additional actions in order to improve, or they need to establish urgent action and prioritize some strategies to overcome the situation in the case of the score 0. The assessment and scoring of each key characteristics is based on assessing the two essential measures of each level. Those are the two ones that are prioritized for the scoring. The additional measures are not considering in the score, but as we mentioned before, exists the possibility for the countries to determine if they want to use additional or essential measures depending on their characteristics. So the overall result is determined by the average of the maturity levels achieved across the 6 key characteristics. The annex also provides some recommendations and guidelines for the implementation of the quality culture based on the maturity model assessment within the statistical agency or unit. For example, that is important to have a team that is in charge of the quality management within the statistical office that lead this process, and we suggest also that probably a period of 1 year to 2 years is possible to have this assessment. And to finalize, we have here the assessment checklist in which we present for each key characteristics, the description of the characteristics. In this case, we have awareness and innovation. So we have the description of these characteristics, like there is a shared understanding of the importance of quality among all levels of staff involvement in the production and dissemination of official statistics. Additionally, fostering a culture of systematic innovations is essential to continuously improving the quality of official statistics, which includes using new data sources, processes refinement, and tailoring outputs to user needs. The use of technology and new methods and tools supports and drives innovation. So we have this description, and then we present the maturity level from 1 to 4, and for each level we present the measure that is essential to accomplish this good practice, and we also include the additional measures that could be considered depending on the context of the statistical office or the user. For each one of these measures, we invite the user to make the specification if they have full, partial, or not compliance. Depending on the case, we will have the score that we mentioned before, 1.5 or 0, and we also ask the user to describe the practices that support the assessment depending on the result they are getting. So this also will help us to identify those good practices that are already in place, and they are like a corresponds to the measure that we want to foster. So we have the score for each one of these essential measures for each level of these particular key characteristics, and we have this table in which we present the summary results. So in the case, for example, that we accomplish all the essential measure for the key characteristics, awareness and innovation, we will have the maximum score of 8 for each key characteristics, and depending on the result, we will have an incomplete of not valid level achieved when we have 0, a score of 0 in all the measures. But we also could have a score of level 1, level 2, or level 3, or level 4, depending on the result of the score. So with this, we hope to facilitate the process of the assessment for countries and users, and also to gather, as I was mentioned before, the best practices that corresponds with the implementation of the maturity model. Based on the results of the maturity model, we suggest to the statistical office to implement a roadmap or a plan that consider the actions that are going to be in place in order to move the statistical office and to move the culture from one level to another until we reach the maximum levels of performance, in this case level 4, in which the quality culture is well established and is part of all the process and activities. So I think with this I can finalize my intervention and be pending on questions or comments regarding this process. Going back to you, Matthias, and thank you.
Juliet, thank you very much for this excellent presentation. So this is the maturity model on quality culture. Is something completely new. We have not found any existing practice on which we could base that. So it's something completely new, but something which we believe is very, very important. So I'm now inviting any questions here, any questions or comments. You can raise your hand and then we will be able to see and call upon you. Yeah, Ian, please.
Thank you. Yes, on the quality side, we found that actually running courses about every 6 weeks to go through a system which we use, actually assessing models rather than statistics, but the idea of an interactive course where people have a live example to work through using a very similar type of assessment structure seems to help people understand how the system works. I don't know if you have any views on how you might use, well, how you might train people to use the maturity matrix.
Ian, thank you very much for your question. So we have been introducing this maturity model and also the assessment checklist at various workshops. So this is what we have been doing so far. However, I think it's a good proposal following hopefully the adoption then by the Statistical Commission of this maturity model. We can offer online training sessions where we also have a little more time to go through things and then have participants presenting the example. No, thank you very much for that suggestion. So far, aside from workshops, we have not been using that assessment checklist. So there has been no online training or anything, but it's a very good suggestion. Any further questions? Today's assessment checklist with Read Me First. Juliet explained it very well, but together with then also reading the Read Me First, I think most of you should be able to find their way through this assessment checklist. And of course, we are happy to respond to any questions or comments. And yeah, we maybe then also offer some maybe training sessions after the Statistical Commission that are online for everyone to participate. I see no further hand being raised. So with this, thank you very much, Juliet, for that, and thank you for chairing the subgroup on the maturity model. So and yeah, thanks to all participants for joining us here today. So we have a last agenda item, but that will be very brief, also in the interest of time. So which is informing about our future work. And I just have a very brief presentation. And if you allow me to extend this side event for 5 more minutes, then I will be able to just bring up here my few slides. So I hope you are able to see my slides. And they provide a summary of the tools that we have available. So this is guidance and tools at the level of the statistical agency, and I would really like to make this difference here. This is the manual, and then we have a self-assessment checklist. We also have a roadmap for the development and implementation of a quality assurance framework. And now we have a maturity model on quality culture in official statistics that hopefully will be endorsed by the Statistical Commission. And here we have a set of tools that are working on the level of individual statistical outputs. This is now the module for quality assurance when using administrative and other data sources. So very important, this works on the level of individual statistical outputs. Actually, not only that, and on the level of the individual statistical data source serving a specific output. Then we have the GSBPM. Then we have quality indicators, quality reports, metadata standards, assessments, and audits. And then forthcoming, we would like to link quality assurance with the use of GSBPM. And this is something where I would like to explain a little more of the work that is forthcoming here. Or here's also the general terms of reference of the expert group, but I'm not going into detail right now. Just what we will be focusing on in the next 2 years. This is the development of the relationship between GSBPM and the national quality assurance frameworks. So quality assurance is an overarching process, and we want to develop that further. The starting point are the quality indicators for the GSBPM that have been published by UN56SC in 2017. Then in addition, we also want to develop guidelines how to use GSBPM to support NCAF implementation. So going both ways, how can we develop quality management within the GSBPM, and the other way around, how can we bring the GSBPM to the quality assurance framework? So going in both directions here. This is what we plan to do in 25, 26. And this work is coordinated, of course, also with the group at UN56SC that has developed the GSBPM. Then there's one more issue. We also want to look into quality aspects related to the use of multiple data sources, the use of machine learning, and other issues related to quality assurance in the context of the evolving national data ecosystem. However, this is really the starting point is here on item 2 to check what others have been doing, because we don't want to duplicate anybody. So this is the focus of the expert group for 2025, 2026. And with this, I'm also completing my very brief presentations. Here I just have the different references to the different tools and things that I just introduced. Okay, so now I'm looking there where there has been any questions, Harumi, in the chat, anything. I know we exceeded our time.
No, I don't see anything in the chat, and I'm checking where there are hands raised, but I don't see any hand either.
So then I would like to thank our presenters here, and also like to thank the participants for joining here this side event that introduced our 2 new tools that supports quality assurance at statistical agencies. So thank you very much for joining today. Always a great pleasure to talk about quality assurance. Hope we will stay in contact, and hope to meet all of you soon again. Thank you very much. Thanks to Martin, Ocha, and Juliet for your presentations. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matthias. Everybody
Thank you,
else.
Matthias.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Matthias. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.